Welcome to the Clear Voice Podcast, brought to you by Clear Career Professionals. Today, we're talking with the authors of Dignity in Leadership. Their work explores the powerful connection between dignity, emotional well-being, and effective leadership. We'll dive into how these ideas can be applied by leaders in government service and what it means for building stronger organizations and healthier communities. Joining me today in the co-host seat is James Hopper. James is a seasoned educator of over 40 years, with 16 of those serving in the executive role of public school districts. James now serves as Associate Vice President at Clear Career Professionals, where he continues to support and prepare both current and future leaders. James, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me, James. I appreciate it. I'm excited to talk to these two gentlemen.
Me too. Let's introduce our special guests, Marcel, Brunel, and Dan Newby, co-authors of Dignity in Leadership and co-founders of Dignity Incorporated. Marcel is the founder of the Brunel Group. He's a former Army Airborne Ranger and has spent the last 20 plus years working with Fortune 500 companies and state and local governments to improve leadership, communication, and performance in those organizations. Dan is the founder of the School of Emotions, a coach, teacher, and author who is passionate about developing emotions as a practical life skill. Dan's vision is a world where emotional literacy is part of every person's education. Together, Dan and Marcel offer powerful insights into how dignity and emotional well-being can transform leadership and strengthen communities. Dan and Marcel, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for being here.
Delighted.
Happy to be here.
All right. So as we get these kicked off, gentlemen, it's been said that we live in a VUCA world, one that is characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Well, any one of these conditions will inherently lead to emotional responses on its own, let alone all of them at the same time. Managing emotional responses to that environment is crucial for individuals who work with the public, police officers, firefighters, city officials, and just everybody in general. Can you tell us just how emotionally equipped are we to handle the world that we live in today in general?
A great question. Well, I've been doing this work for a long time, and my experience is that most people are like I used to be, emotionally unschooled, emotionally ignorant, emotionally illiterate. It doesn't mean that we don't have emotions. It doesn't mean that we haven't done pretty well up till now. But one of the things I find is that we have a general idea about emotions, but we don't go much farther than that. And most people don't see emotions as a tool, as a life skill, as something they have choice about. And I think that if we can help normalize emotions, just like we sleep and we have emotions and we eat, I think it changes everything, because now we have a whole set of tools that we never saw before.
I think the other way that Dan and I think about it is through the lens of you can only regulate you. So sometimes when we work with leaders, they like to control what's out ahead of them. They like to maybe be in charge of regulating the environment so they can keep their own tranquility and solitudinous. And what we're really about is the individual leader thinking about three things. Emotions play a big role in decision-making. They play a big role in problem solving, and they play a big role in emotion and relationship building. And those are the things that we're trying to bring awareness to. There's not just the intellectual side of decision-making, problem-solving, relationship building. There is a sense of how emotions play a big role in those three things. And so we're about maybe you regulating you to be ready for any environment, not you trying to control the environment of which each and every time you're walking into.
So let me ask you this then, as an individual. I'm a pretty emotional guy. In fact, I'm an emotional sap at sometimes. But I found that early on in my career as a leader that often got in the way. Because when I'm using emotion, it's hard for me to make really critical decisions because my decision-making ability seemed to be clouded. How can I use the information that you gentlemen bring to be able to, my go-to was to just simply separate myself from my emotion and use straight logic. How would you respond to that, and how could I have done that better?
The curious thing about emotions is sometimes there are emotions that we don't know are emotions. And one of the emotions that helps in the situation you're describing is what we call dispassion. So we all know what passion is. We get involved. We want to be part of it. Well, dispassion is also an emotion, but what it allows you to do is to be pragmatic, to just get it done. right? Just do it, like Nike says, where you set down your emotions. You put them over here. You say, yep, I got big emotions about this. But you know what? I'm not going to focus on those. I'm going to focus on just getting this done. I can always go back and pick up these emotions and work with them and examine them and try to understand them, but they're not really serving me in this situation. So sometimes people might describe it as being cold or separated, etc. But there actually is an emotion that if you cultivate it, it allows you to choose that. So you can simply be in the process of getting things done without getting pulled away by your emotions. But again, this is part of emotional literacy and education. We just don't know how many emotions there are and how they serve us.
When I work with first responders, they'll come at the idea that we don't use emotions at all. And you're like, well, you absolutely have an emotion about emotions. And so when Dan was talking about dispassion, that does allow first responders to make decisions that are very matter of fact, very logical. The other side of that is sometimes we wear that home. And so when we bump into an emotional situation, it's really hard to solve an emotional problem with logic. And so sometimes we have to navigate into another emotion that might be something like compassion, that might be something like prudence. So the bigger our library is of emotions and how we name them, there's over 200 that we kind of think are in the human body, but it does allow us to be able to meet the situation with the right emotion at hand. So I think just because I get really good at prudence, it might be kind of addictive to not ever have to worry about my emotions ever again. Sometimes when I walk inside of a police department or a fire department, someone will raise their hand and they'll say, I think you're asking me to be more emotional. And that's my miscommunication. What we are asking you to be is intellectually sound and emotionally regulated. We regulate everything. Last night when I went to sleep, I put earplugs in to regulate the sound. I put a mask on to regulate the light. I'm bald, so I have to wear a hat to regulate the sun. When I'm going to eat my lunch today, I promise you there's going to be some hot sauce to regulate the taste. One thing that we know is that for too long, maybe we've given emotions a bad rap. Maybe there's a lot of bad misperceptions and misapprehensions. One thing that we know, generation to generation, they're not genetic. There's still somebody out there saying you should control your emotions. Okay, let's go with that thought. There's still some people in 2025, as we dig for water on Mars, that say there's positive and negative emotions. Okay, well, I think these are bad myths from maybe 1925 as we walk our way into being brutally honest as we give somebody feedback in 2025.
You've touched on a key concept, and if I'm reading your material accurately, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's just that. So here's a concept that I took from your material. Emotions aren't inherently positive or negative. They are just tools. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's actually quite easy to test. You know, if you take a negative emotion, one we typically think of as negative, like fear, and you say, well, is fear sometimes helpful? Sure, it keeps us safe, right? It keeps us out of danger. Is fear sometimes a barrier? Sure, it keeps me from doing things I really want to do, like skydive. So is it a positive emotion or a negative emotion? And we would argue it's neither. It's just an emotion. Where it becomes useful or a barrier, it depends on the situation. But we can think about this with every emotion. Jealousy gives us lots of information, but does sometimes it move us to try to control situation or manipulate people? Yeah. Well, that's not so positive, but the information we get could be really helpful. So we look at every emotion and we think sometimes it's a little hard to discern, like an emotion like rage. How could that ever be helpful? But if you look hard enough and if you stick with it, actually you find that every emotion has this. And so our conclusion is they're not positive or negative inherently. It's just the way we think about them, probably because many of them are uncomfortable and we tend to call those negative, and some are really pleasurable and we tend to call those positive. But if we don't pay attention to all of them, we're only using half the palette.
With that being said, since emotions are tools, a tool used well is very helpful, but if I use it incorrectly, it can be actually damaging.
Absolutely. Just think of a sharp knife.
So I'm a leader. Let's say I'm a city administrator, and I've heard all my life that if I'm emotional, I'm a soft leader, and I'm just, I'm going to have to be that person who is just a hard, demanding person, and emotion equals ineffectiveness. How would you respond?
I think it might be one of those myths that maybe we were taught. I believe when I grew up in Houston in the 80s, in the early 80s, they wouldn't let football players have water. Okay, I'm going to have my 40th class reunion. And 40 years ago, they said water was for wimps, 2-a-days. Okay, let's go. We got that wrong. And I think sometimes we got tough wrong. As an airborne ranger, they told me that not brushing my teeth for 2 months would make me strong. No, it didn't. It gave me gingivitis. They told me that my performance would go up as you screamed and spit on me. No, it didn't. I resented you. So there's a lot of bad myths out there that I think we got wrong, that I think today we can do better. So if I was a leader inside of a city municipality and someone said out loud that being a human, which has given me some emotion, and if I demonstrate those, that's a sign of weakness. You don't know you have a misperception until somebody tells you. And so I think that's a big misperception. One more thought as we're talking about this. It amazes me when you hear people say, I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional. So what that teaches me is that we haven't normalized emotions. We've normalized credit cards. We've normalized restaurants. We've normalized reading. 200 years ago, only 10% of the population could read. We've normalized space travel. We've normalized lots of things. We haven't normalized emotions. That's what we haven't normalized. And so when you hear people say that, it might be a chance to better clarify or create a different emotion in that person, because that's what makes us human. And so that's kind of how I would respond to maybe a misperception or a misapprehension of emotions.
Could I add something? Because Marcel touched on this before, but when we're learning about emotions, and this happens when we work with groups or do coaching, is sometimes people have this misperception that we are asking them to be emotional, to exhibit their emotions more, to wear them on their sleeve. And actually becoming emotionally regulated or emotionally literate or emotionally competent doesn't mean that. It's no different than being intellectually competent. It doesn't mean you have to go around telling people everything you know. No, you get to decide. You get to decide when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate. Exactly the same with emotions. So if we're emotionally competent and we can dial up or dial back our emotions by choice, then we can decide, because in the situation you described, sometimes it would be really useful to display, to model, to show your emotions as a leader. And sometimes it would be completely inappropriate. But only you can choose that. Only you can regulate you. So I would say that, this is the answer. To me, it's not that we're asking people to be more emotional all the time. We're just saying, learn about them and choose and put them to use for you. So I think your question's fabulous, because I think a lot of people don't see the difference in those.
So I want to piggyback one more thing on what Dan just said, because when I walk into a police department, I'm like, hey, good morning. We're going to spend the next 4 hours talking about emotions. And you can see them rolling up the window right in your face. So like the windshields are going up, and it's like, this isn't what I need. What I also think got a bad rap was vulnerability. So I think it got a bad rap. And it's exactly what Dan said. When you are emotionally regulated as a leader, inside of a city, inside of an organization, heck, inside my family. What that says is two things. I'm able to regulate maybe when I should share and demonstrate an emotion, and I'm able to regulate and delay sharing or demonstrating an emotion. Share it, maybe save it. Display it, maybe delay it. But here's the other part. You'll see inside of a police department this fear or concern that if I'm vulnerable, it's going to come back and get me. Okay, well, you have movable eyelids. And the reason that we have movable eyelids is to regulate the light coming in. What Dan said is very powerful. We're not asking you to walk around with your eyes wide open all the time and sharing everything on your heart. We're not asking you to walk around with your eyes completely closed, shut down, so no one can see what's going on inside. What we are asking you is to regulate. Some people wear sunglasses to regulate the sun. And that's where we go. I get a little tired when you hear people say, we need to be more emotionally intelligent. I'm here to let you know that came out, that first phrase, 1985. I got married in 95. That's 30 years ago. And I think we've evolved as humans into emotional literacy, emotional resilience, emotional agility. So it's not just intelligence. Where we are evolving towards is emotional regulation, where it combines all of those into a human that can adapt and adjust accordingly based on what the situation is calling for.
So I think this is actually a concept of strength that we have in our society. For in other words, I always tell my staff, you've got to be strong enough to be vulnerable, and that meekness is a chosen condition. Meekness is not weakness. I can use it when I need to be. There are times when I don't need to be meek. Like you're saying, that I can regulate my own emotions. That's huge. That's powerful.
Yeah, it's huge. The thing that always surprises us is how few people know that. Once you share it with them and once you demonstrate it for them, they get it. It's not like they can't understand it. But I had great parents, loving parents. Did they teach me any of this stuff? No. Why not? They didn't know it. Like these were not things that had been articulated. Now they have been. So sometimes we think about emotions as they're evolving as a kind of new human technology that we've always had, but now we're becoming aware of. And that's exciting. It's very powerful, but most of us have just not spent much time there.
Marcel, you mentioned a term just a minute ago, emotional resilience. How do I develop that?
We're actually doing a lot of research on that. Funny you should ask. What we're learning is about emotional resilience is that we need people around us to be resilient. It's really hard to become resilient when you live in the forest all by yourself. You can be physically resilient, but what about emotionally resilient? Being able to bounce back. Hey, you didn't get promoted as a lieutenant, you died on the vine. Can you bounce back? Hey, we took your bite dog away in canine and we gave you a sniff dog. Can you bounce back? Do you see that to be so emotionally detrimental? You got divorced. My daughter didn't make it into the college that she wanted to get into. Hey, dad's drinking again. So bounce back requires humans. We're also learning that the emotion of optimism really plays a big role in the ability to bounce back. So if you work with veterans inside of a city, after 28, 29 years, most of them are optimistic. Some of them are very entitled. Some of them are very pessimistic. Some of them, I just want to get out. Just let me go. And that's okay. That's okay. But when you look at emotional resilience, optimism plays a role, but so does your personality. And what we're learning is that we're measuring neuroticism. Neuroticism is how emotionally charged you are, just naturally. What's your preference to show emotions once you feel them? And maybe the other side would be, what would be your preference to delay your emotions, more stoical? And that's playing a big role in your ability to be resilient. The lower I can be in my neuroticism, the higher potential and probability I have in my resilience, my ability to have that book called Grit. Yeah, but we're writing a book called Dignity. And it allows me to stand in dignity, but it also allows me to extend dignity. So 7.5 years ago, I went on a journey to figure out one thing. Why did I lie to my spouse after 20 years of marriage about my drinking? So I felt 3 emotions. I felt guilt, shame, and embarrassment. Guilt because I thought my willpower as an Army Airborne Ranger should be stronger than alcohol. I felt shame because I was lying to her saying I'm not drinking. And then I felt the emotion of embarrassment. I couldn't raise my hand and say, I'm not doing well. So I went on a 7.5-year journey, met Dan along the way, changed my life. Why? Because when you're resilient and you bounce back, you have a different arsenal of things to be able to pull from, like tolerance, acceptance. What's that one? It starts with a P, Dan. Prudence. Yes, I'll take prudence for 1,000. Being able to have a whole nother arsenal to pull from allows you to coexist with other humans and not melt down and run, which is the opposite of being resilient.
Yeah. And that bounce back also is a response to resistance. In the world of sports, we do resistance training. And if there is no resistance, you don't get stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, one of the curious things we find is that in our assessment, when we help people see these quadrants and measure them, is that sometimes we find people who are very emotionally resilient, but they're not very emotionally literate. And what does that tell us? It tells us they've developed emotional resilience through practice, through facing challenges in their lives, through needing to be able to bounce back due to their circumstances. But they never really learned anything about the structure of emotions or how to think about emotions or how to leverage emotions. So that gives them enormous possibility. But what it helped us see is that agility and resilience emotionally are practice. We develop them through doing them. So the more you can practice bouncing back from things more easily, more fluidly, the stronger your emotional resilience gets. It's not learning something intellectually, it's learning something through practice. Again, just like the athletics analogy.
Here's a perfect example of what Dan just said. You'll hear somebody say this: I know I shouldn't worry, but I know I shouldn't be concerned, but I know I shouldn't be anxious. Well, there's a big difference between knowing about being anxious and maybe better knowing how to navigate it. Just because you watch cooking shows doesn't make you a chef. And just because you watch MLB baseball doesn't make you a baseball player. There's a big difference between knowing about emotions and knowing how to leverage them. My eyes can see my nose 24 hours a day, but they choose not to acknowledge my nose. Sometimes we choose not to acknowledge a very awesome tool inside of us called our emotions. And because of myths and because of misapprehensions and because of culture, because of identity, because of image, those prevent us. So when I go inside of a police department, it's one of three things. It's culture, it's image, and it's identity. Those are the three things that will allow people to have the emotion of stubbornness, which says, I'm not changing my belief. I am human. I am strong. I wear a medium shirt. I have tattoos, and I'm here to protect. I love it. I think that's wonderful. Another emotion is denial. Another emotional is cynicism. Another emotion is contempt. I still work with police departments in Texas where humans inside the police department are called non-sworns. It's 2025. They're like, well, that's just semantics. Well, then why do we call SWAT officers operators? If it's just semantics, why do we do that? What's the value in a name? And these are things that become very passionate to people. I love it when SWAT officers are able to do what they're supposed to do, but it takes a emotion that allows me to persevere in a situation where I may not have ever been. Boldness is different from bravery, which is different from courage. How do I know the difference when I'm uplifting somebody in a critical incident review? If I only know 12 emotions, that's the most I can listen for. So what Dan said is very powerful. A lot of people know about. What we're bumping into is, and we want to be helpful, is knowing how. How do I notice what I'm feeling? How do I name what I'm feeling? And how do I better navigate what I'm feeling? Not control your emotions, 1925. Navigate your emotions, 2025.
So if you could teach me to do one thing, and it doesn't matter whether I'm a city administrator, a police officer, a firefighter, but I run into a situation where normally I would be emotionally responsive, and I want to be more in control of my emotions, not dispassionate, but the appropriate emotion. How would you teach me to regulate and not be so knee-jerk into a potentially deleterious emotion? Do I need to first name that emotion? Do I need to practice doing this? How would I do that?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on the emotion because we might work with different emotions differently. To give you an example is that, so I'm a leader in my own company. Yeah, and with Marcel. And I had a situation one day here recently where I was feeling this energy, and I was like, I don't know what that is, but I don't like it. And I had to sit with it. And once I did, I thought, you know what? I think that's frustration. I feel frustration. So what I did is I thought about, so what is frustration? What does frustration mean? What's the story? What's the narrative? What am I believing? And it was that this is too hard. This is too hard, it's too difficult, it's taking too long. And so for me, that already changed my situation because now I understood what was happening with me. But the other thing it allowed me to do is talk to Marcel and say, help me with this because I need something else. Frustration is not going to get me what I need here because it was dealing with another person we work with. And so what it allowed me to do was not so much dial back the frustration, although that did happen, but it was look for an emotion that might serve me better. So sometimes what happens is emotions get ignited and we end up there by default. But what we find is always if that emotion is causing some difficulty or it's a barrier, We have lots of other emotions we could shift to. And what Marcel helped me see just through a short conversation was curiosity. Like, why is it occurring? Because you have a commitment, you have a promise from this person, but it's not happening the way you think it should. All right. So what about curiosity? What about compassion? What about trying to understand what's going on to move out of the frustration? So I would say that there's lots of techniques like breathing, slowing down, pausing, walking away, counting to 10 that we can use to take a break from the reactive aspect of emotions. But where I think we want to get to often is the response. Okay, now how am I going to respond to that experience of frustration? So these are all practices. There's not a one practice that resolves everything, but there's a whole series of practices. And sometimes we know these. Counting to 10 is not new technology. Like we all know count to 10, but how many of us are disciplined enough to do it? Not so many. So really it comes out of developing habits that allow us to navigate emotions differently.
You guys talked about a lot of different emotions. Do you see, when you're doing your research and training in the organizations that you're dealing with, do you see a common set of 2 or 3 that always seem to be coming up as the barriers in these organizations, which will help leaders identify that, because they may not be emotionally literate, may be experiencing this or seeing this and not even know what to call it to even start with?
I'll go first. The reason the books are called Dignity In is because dignity was the number one emotion that allows that profession to remain a noble profession. So we started with dignity in policing, and we found by talking with 4,000 first responders that dignity was the emotion most needed and necessary to have a profession called policing remain a noble profession. Entitlement was the number one that eroded the nobility. What's entitlement? Well, if you talk to veteran officers, they'll say that the young officers are entitled. Hey, how come I'm working the weekends? Hey, how come I don't get to do K9? Or how come I'm not able to go and have a take-home vehicle? And then you talk to the younger officers and they'll say the veterans are kind of entitled. So entitlement is a big one that we run into that is a barrier emotion. Another one we run into is stubbornness. My mom was stubborn. Yeah, she wouldn't change her belief on many things. And when you won't change your belief on many things, it impedes growth. It impedes connection. Stubbornness is a big one. We find contempt. So you'll walk inside and they're like, this is BS. You haven't even heard what we're talking about. Contempt allows me to remain ignorant for the rest of my life. Contempt prior to investigation. That's another one. We also run into my favorite, which is denial. Denial, which means you guys are hard to work with. No, we're not. We're just fair. Okay, you win. Okay, so denial is a big emotion. Stubbornness is a big emotion. Contempt is a big emotion. But also, too, don't forget about my good friend called cynicism. Cynicism's a wonderful emotion. It's what allowed the United States as a whole for everyone to be able to vote. Cynicism says, I don't believe anything you're saying. And guess what? I'm going to go find other people who kind of believe what I believe so I can get my own power source. I'm going to take out that lieutenant. I just got to get a couple sergeants on my side, and then we're going to go to marketplace. We're going to go see chief, and we're going to take this lieutenant out. Cynicism is very awesome. But going back to what James asked, it can be the number one thing that erodes a culture. When I walk inside of a police department, they'll say, we got morale problems. What it equals is policy change. Policy change equals morale issues. And when people don't wrap their hands around that, it can get out of hand. So, James, that's a great question. Because when we walk in and we're like, hey, we want to normalize emotions inside of your police department, I promise you, sir, we run into stubbornness, cynicism, denial. We run into contempt, and we run into the last one, arrogance. Arrogance is a big one. And arrogance is a wonderful emotion, especially if you're doing the right thing and no one else believes in you. That's okay. That's okay. I live in Texas. In Texas, there's good Texas pride. And people think pride is a bad emotion. No, it's not. It's a wonderful emotion. It says, I've done something good and I want to tell somebody about it, but they confuse it with arrogance. Arrogance sounds like we can only learn from people who do our job. Wow, that sounds great. I can't believe you wouldn't be able to learn from anybody else who's never done your role or responsibility. So there's many that keep us from doing our best work, but that's okay. We're still willing to try. We know that many times when you have DWIs, many times when you have family violence, many times when you have humans who take their life by suicide, when you have burnout, these are all emotion-based. Well, how do we work on those? If we normalize emotions inside the agency, inside the city, then maybe we have a better potential and probability of working through them.
My derailer that I've identified at least is passion. Looking at it, sometimes my passion doesn't come across as passion. So do you have any advice for me while we're here on this podcast?
Well, there's dispassion that we already talked about. But I would say passion is also related to some other emotions that can be really useful. For instance, if you think about enthusiasm. Now, enthusiasm, the root, means a divine project, right? To be connected with the divine. It's our purpose. It's our goal. The beauty of enthusiasm, when we bring that to a conversation, is it includes other people. Other people can join us in that enthusiasm, our commitment to something beyond us, bigger than us. And I think that it can be really helpful because now people are included. They don't feel like your passion is overwhelming to them because they're included in it. So that would be one possibility, but I would guess that there are probably many. And a short conversation about, well, give us an example. How does this happen? When does it show up? I think would reveal more. But one of the principles that we absolutely see is that passion might be your preference. Great. I feel passion. Like I don't have to try. I just feel passion. But sometimes it's not working for me. It's not getting me what I want. So then we start looking at the list. Then we start looking at what are the other possibilities, because there is always 1 or 2 or 10 emotions that can be more helpful than the passion. Nothing wrong with a passion, but sometimes a passion needs support from something else, some other emotion. And it might be compassion. It might be enthusiasm. It might be respect, to listen to what they're passionate about. So again, I think there's lots of possibilities. And I think this is the beauty of emotions. There's not just one answer. There's lots of answers, lots of possibilities. So there's always something. You're never at a loss for where you might go. The question then is, what do you think is going to work best? And what are you willing to try?
One of the things we also know about passion is it is an emotion because it has 3 components. What makes an emotion, we think, is it has a story. When you have this story in your head that I have a deep desire. So James Groom has a deep desire. I have a deep desire. You can hear it in my voice on this podcast. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes my deep desire isn't as deep as somebody else's. And they're like, hey, why don't you dial that back a bit there, young man? And so passion can be awesome until you bump into somebody who maybe doesn't have that deep desire. The impulse, when I feel the emotion of passion, it's to get as close as possible to what I'm able to be passionate about. And the purpose is to generate rapport with others at a deeper level. So just remember, you said, hey, maybe some free coaching. Every emotion can be dialed up and every emotion can be dialed back. And the dial back, sometimes Marcel has to remember they don't need a 4-battery Marcel today. Maybe they just need 1 battery. Maybe I just talk with 1 battery. I move with 1 battery. I take notes with 1 battery. I say goodbye with 1 battery, and then I'm on my way. I think the second one is I have to keep asking myself, what's the source of this passion? Dan and Marcel want to be a pilot light, ready to ignite something bigger than us. But that's not for everyone. And so I have to be mindful that sometimes maybe it is a 1 battery passion to say some things, show some things, share some things. But I love it. So in closing on what we were just saying there, we are always able to design our emotional way forward. When I got a phone call on June the 19th that my mom had passed away, I got to decide the emotion that I was going to experience that in. Absolutely. So we are always in choice. And you'll hear people say, one of the principles that Dan and I have is emotions don't justify your behavior. They better explain your behavior. And that's a big deal. When people say, well, I was angry, that's why I did it. No. Come here. That just better helps me understand. It doesn't justify. I've had trauma. Everybody who's listening to this podcast has had trauma. That doesn't justify our behavior. It better explains our behavior. And so there is some responsibility on everybody's side to be responsible for the energy you bring inside the city, inside the council meeting, inside the one-on-one, inside your family. You're responsible.
Marcel, I think it's great. In my final question, because I could talk to you guys all day and you don't want that, but my final question is this. We've been talking about the individual's regulation of their own emotions. However, the more emotional literacy I have, I'm able to name my own emotions and regulate them accurately. Doesn't it also help me to recognize those emotions in others and know how to speak to them?
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. That's part of the beauty. It helps with communication. It helps me understand people better. If I look at someone, I can pretty well guess from what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, I can get pretty close to the emotion. If they name it for me, then I'm home. Then I'm there. Then I can really understand. And then if I have an understanding of what Marcel was talking about, the structure, oh, there's a narrative here. They're thinking something that's connected with this emotion. They have some impulse connected with this emotion, and it's showing up for some purpose, some reason. So I think the better we can articulate for us, the better we can understand other people. One simple analogy for me is imagine that we only knew the word fruit. Okay, so you want something to eat. So what do? You go ask for a piece of fruit. Well, you wanted a banana, but they gave you a pineapple. Why? Because you don't have the distinctions about fruit that would allow you to ask for what you want or what you need, but the other person doesn't have the distinctions to give you, because if they don't know what a banana, if they don't know what a pineapple is, they'll just give you any old fruit because that's all they know. So the more precise we can get with our understanding of emotion, the easier it is to share, this is what's happening for me. I don't have to hide it anymore, right? Because it's not something to be ashamed of or embarrassed about. This is just what's happening for me. I don't really understand it, but if I share a language with you around emotions, you're really clear what that is. And then you can make an offer to me. Well, how can I help you, Dan? How can I support you? Or you want me to just listen? Etc. We do talk about emotions as an individual characteristic, but groups have emotions, cities have emotions, nations have emotions, or moods, we might call them. And I think that emotions are contagious, right? You go to a rock concert, right? Nobody's sitting there in solitude. I mean, everybody is excited, enthusiastic, elated. Why? Because it's the collective emotion, and this is something that happens in organizations too. The mood at Apple and the mood at, pick any other company, Walmart, completely different emotionally. It's not just that they do different things, but that mood or that emotion allows them to do what they do, how they do it. And this is real culture change in our book. It's like when you can address the mood or the underlying emotions in a group, in an organization, in a team, that's where real change happens.
Thank you.
In the book, we wrote self-awareness plus others' awareness equals intentionality. And what do we say self-awareness is? That's Marcel's ability to be emotionally intelligent and emotionally literate. Those are things I practice on my own. The better I get at my self-awareness, now I'm able to go and be with other humans to be others. What is other awareness? Well, that's emotional resilience and emotional agility. What does that allow me to do? Be more intentional. You'll hear somebody say, well, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I know it's because you weren't intentional. So intentionality says you're going to show up. And one of the key principles that we believe is there's an ironclad connection between your emotions and the quality of service you're delivering inside of your city.
I want to thank you guys as we wrap up here. I know Dignity in Policing and Dignity in Leadership are both out on the shelves now. You can go get a copy of those. Dan and Marcel, can you tell us a little bit about maybe what you guys have coming up? And if somebody would love to get in contact with you guys and get some advice, some help with their organization, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, the first thing is if you send an email to info@dignity-inc.com, it goes to both of us. So we'll both see it at the same time, and we'd be happy to respond. Second thing is we're happy to have a conversation with anybody. Anybody who's interested, anybody who's attracted to this topic, we love to talk to them. As far as what's coming, well, new book, Dignity in Education, Dignity in Recovery. There's new books coming. There's an emotional regulation assessment, dashboard assessment that's almost complete. We present programs. We have a group of practitioners. It just keeps growing bigger and bigger in lots of different ways. So I would say if anybody's interested in this, we should have a conversation about how does this apply to you? What is it that you want? What would be helpful? Because our focus is service, right? What can we offer you? And how would it make sense to offer that so that it helps you move down the road in terms of your emotional learning? And like Marcel said, some people aren't interested, and that's fine. And some people are already quite advanced, and that's fine. And some people are beginners, and that's perfect. So wherever you are, we're happy to talk to you. Marcel?
The other thing that we are thinking about too is some employees within a city want to become practitioners and do inside the city what we do. That's way awesome. Sometimes we're also thinking through how we're going to do this on an international basis. So dignity in policing is in 7 different countries. Dignity in leadership is in the same amount. So this is happening not only just inside of certain countries, it's happening globally because people are starting to notice that dignity is the emotion that we, like chapter 13, it's the uber emotion. It's the number one that grandparents want to feel when they're around their grandkids. It's the number one thing that the records people and dispatch want to feel inside of an agency. And it's the number one thing that a citizen wants to feel, maybe, inside the city.
Well, thank you guys. We appreciate the conversation. And like James said, we could sit here and talk forever, but I know you guys have lots of things to do. We appreciate your time, and we will look for everybody on the next podcast. Thanks.
Been a pleasure.